And we are live. Perfect. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 4 of Book Dragons Babble. I know I didn't do much promo for this one because it's been a busy month. It's what we were just talking about in the backstage. That December is always busier than you think it's going to be. So, welcome. Today, we're going to be talking about all things fantasy, just favorite fantasy books, authors, tropes, anything and everything. Books that you want people to associate with you, maybe books we associate with each other. That could be fun too.
Oh, that would be fun.
And
Yeah.
just talk about that. So why don't you introduce yourselves first? Jolien, you can go first, and then Joanna.
Hi everyone. So I am Jolien. I also have a small booktube channel called Jolien Reads because I was extremely creative when I made my name. And I'm just really excited to talk about all types of books. Fantasy, it's going to be a fun time.
Hey, and my name is Johanna, and just from the name Johanna, because I'm not very creative with my name either. My handle is actually Johanna Reads right now. So if that's how you want to find me on a search, but yeah, I mostly read fantasy, though I do read other genres as well. But yeah, mostly fantasy. I have a channel and I like to do discussion videos like this and reviews and all types of bookish content.
Cool, thank you. Well, I'm Joanna, you're on my channel, and thank you, Jolien and Joanna, for joining me. I think you've seen these girls on my channel quite a bit because we're also doing the Song of Ice and Fire read or reread along together, along with Alex and Scott, which I have linked also their channels down below so that you can check them out and join us for the Song of Ice and Fire read or reread. That's the longest name you could have come up with, isn't it? Song of Ice and Fire read or reread along for next year.
Because I'm just so creative.
But again, my channel name is my name too, so we are just creative people, I guess. Okay, so I think actually it would be cool to do like books that we associate with one another first, and then see how accurate or not accurate it is.
Yeah.
So, do any of you want to go first and say what books you associate with someone else? No. Or I guess I could go first if you want, because funnily enough, Joanna, since your channel name is just your name, there's a lot of people that have our names. Like in this chat, there's 3 of us and we have 2 of the same name.
That's true.
And so every time I used to look for your channel, I had to put your name and then I typed Malazan right behind it. That's the only way I could find your channel for a long time.
Oh, wow.
And now I still do it. Like automatically when I type your name, I'm like Joanna Malazan, and I'm like, that's not actually her name. I just need to remember that that's not your name.
Maybe I should change my channel name to Johanna Malazan.
I think you should. Hello. And then every time I think about starting that book, I'm like, I need to message her and ask her for like advice and just to calm me down, calm my nerves down. So I think when I think of you, I think of Malazan Book of the Fallen.
Oh, well, that's a nice association because it is my favorite series of all time. And since we're talking about favorite fantasy, that's kind of perfect.
Yeah.
Wonderful. And what about Jolien? What do you think of Jolien?
So I do think mostly Robin Hobb. That's the first thing I think of. Robin Hobb and also A Song of Ice and Fire. Those are 2 things. And what's her name? Juliet Marillier? Is that her?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Those are the 3 pretty accurate. Yes. Exactly.
Yeah. That's perfect. I think the same thing. Like when I think of Jolene's channel, I immediately think fairy tale fantasy and grimdark.
Yeah.
Those are like the 2 opposites, but
yeah. Yeah, it's like the yin and the yang with her. Like it's either or. So yeah, Juliet Marillier is definitely an author I would associate with you too because of Daughter of the Forest that you brought so much attention to. I know you also loved The Witch's Heart. And as far as Grimdark, I know you love The Ashes and Sand. Is that the name of the trilogy?
Oh, yeah.
Ashes and Sand by Richard Nell. And that I don't remember. I know you're enjoying First Law, but
almost done.
Almost
done. I know that both of you are reading it, right?
It's the First Law. Yeah, I haven't gotten to the Age of Madness trilogy yet. Yeah, I just have that, and I'm debating whether to read Sharp Ends. I'm on the fence about it.
Same as you.
Yeah. And as far as Joanna, I think I think Robin Hobb as well. I think Robin Hobb definitely comes up in my mind as well when I think of you. And I know you said you've liked Grimdark too. I know you love Abercrombie and Sanderson. Definitely the Mistborn trilogy.
Yeah.
Definitely the Hero. Wait, no, not Hero of Ages. The first one, the
Final Empire.
Final Empire.
Final Empire is number one. What I think of when I think of your channel.
Makes me happy.
Yay.
I reply to Evie at the same time. Okay, cool. So I do think it's funny that we associate those series, and we were accurate. So that's a very good thing. We know each other. But Jolien and I were actually talking right before you came on backstage, Johanna, about kind of our origin story with fantasy and epic fantasy. And actually, for both of us, it was the Final Empire. So because you were saying, Jolien, that that's what got you back into reading, right?
Yes,
the Final
exactly.
Empire, the trilogy. Did you read the trilogy or just the first book first?
The funny thing is, it was around the Christmas time actually, because it was the holidays, and I think that the virus happened, so we couldn't really go out. I was a little bit bored, and I had two firsts of a series that I already owned for years, and I hadn't read them yet. The first one was The Final Empire, but then in Dutch. Had never heard of Brandon Sanderson, and then the other one was The Grim Company by Luke Scull. So I first read The Final Empire, absolutely loved it. Then I started looking for Brandon Sanderson online. That's how I found BookTube as well. And I didn't understand all of these booktubers who had so many books on their shelves and they hadn't read them yet. Why would you do that? You read a book, when you finish it, you buy a new one, right? So I was talking to my husband, I don't understand why they do that. And now 2 years later, I'm one of those people. But yeah, Brandon Sanderson not only got me back into fantasy, because 10 years before that, I did read The Song of Ice and Fire and The Name of the Wind. So I still really am very grateful for that. Not only fantasy, but also the BookTube community, because otherwise I wouldn't have found that either.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Yeah, I used to read, because English is not my first language, and so I had to start with YA because it was what was easiest for me to digest. And then I thought, okay, I need a book that's going to be a transition between adult and YA, and that's going to be easy for me to understand. And everyone kept on saying The Final Empire, The Final Empire. I was like, you know what? I'm going to give this Brandon Sanderson dude a go. And then the rest is history. So.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah, for me, I originally fell in love with fantasy with The Hobbit back when I was, I think, 15 years old. I'm trying to think. I mean, I don't think I really. I remember reading as a kid. I read some stories that might be considered fantasy, like The Pied Piper of Hamelin and Pandora's Box. Those could be kind of considered fantasy, I suppose. But it was really The Hobbit that made me fall in love with fantasy, and some of Lord of the Rings, so I didn't finish it at the time. I did really love The Fellowship of the Ring and The Two Towers, and I still remember what that experience was like at the time reading Tolkien. And then I did read some other fantasy at the time. I read some Elric. I read some David Eddings and some Piers Anthony and some other fantasy I'm probably forgetting, because I'm always having amnesia about the fantasy I read when I was younger. But I took a long break from fantasy, and what made me fall back in love with fantasy is A Song of Ice and Fire. And it just, that series for me did for me what the Neverending Story. So the Neverending Story I read when I was a teenager as well, and I loved it. I loved the Neverending Story then because I had grown up with the movie. And so growing up with the movie, I always loved the movie, but when I was a teenager, I had a friend in high school, or I don't think we were even in the same high school, but anyway, I had a friend as a teen who lent me that book, and I didn't know it was a book before it was a movie. And I read the book and my mind was just blown. I didn't realize that the movie ended halfway through the book, and I didn't realize like how good. That was the first time that I ever had the experience of understanding what a book could do that a movie couldn't, because that was a long time ago. So I didn't realize that. I didn't realize the power of book versus movie until The Neverending Story. So it left a big imprint on my heart. And I did reread it a few years ago, and I loved it just as much. But with The Song of Ice and Fire, which I found about 11 years ago now, I think, that series, it felt to me like it woke me up to this sense of wonder and excitement and passion that I hadn't felt since reading Tolkien as a teenager. And that's what I've been looking for. It's like you find something that you didn't even know you were looking for, and that at the same time feels so much a part of you, even though it's new. That's how I felt with The Song of Ice and Fire. And I did take a long break again from fantasy, and I did re-enter with Mistborn, which is interesting. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the Mistborn trilogy when I read it. I read a lot of Sanderson. I read tons and tons of Sanderson before I started a channel. I don't think even though I really enjoyed all the Sanderson I read, I don't think it ever really did for me, though, what A Song of Ice and Fire did or what Tolkien did before. It never reached that level for me, though I can also see how maybe different times in life that could have been different. If I had found Mistborn, maybe at the time I found A Song of Ice and Fire, maybe that would have been different. I don't know.
They are very different, so you can never know. Yeah,
it's actually really nice that you say that the Never-Ending Story is different from the movie, because I've never read the book, but after seeing your edition, I just asked the normal one for Christmas. I do hope that I'm going to get it.
Yeah.
And I've only seen the movie, but I really enjoyed that. So to hear that it's different.
It is different. It is different. I still love that movie. That movie it still has a very special place in my heart. And I wouldn't change anything about the movie. I think as far as adaptations are concerned, wouldn't change a thing about it. Love the movie. The book, though, I mean, they're just perfectly complementary experiences. The book is very different, though. The character is even different. Everything that happens in the second half of that book is very different. So even the sequels of the movie are nothing like the book. So I highly recommend reading the book. If you love the movie, read the book. If you didn't really care for the movie, I don't know that the book would be for you, but it's probably my favorite Portal fantasy.
Okay.
I haven't seen the movie or watched. Wait, no, seen the movie, or read the book. So.
Oh, so good, yeah.
You're saying if you love the Princess Bride film, read the book. It's a combination as well. I think. Okay, I've seen the movie.
Yeah. I think I'm trying to think if I liked one better than the other. I did love both, though. I think I might have loved The Princess Bride a little bit more, the movie a little bit more than the book, though, because I've rewatched that movie like hundreds and hundreds of times, and I would probably rewatch that movie, but I don't know that I would reread the book. Maybe. Yeah.
Okay. I haven't seen or read that story. I tried to do it a little bit more, like where you have the adaptation and then read the book at the same time and see the differences. But I only did that for Stardust by Neil Gaiman, and then I took a break. But The Princess Bride is another one that I have on that list.
Did you ever do a video on that, Jolien, on the Stardust?
It was a small vlog for Stardust.
Oh, okay.
Like a couple of months ago.
I must have missed that. I'll have to go back and check it out because I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Because I personally really enjoyed Stardust, but I actually preferred the movie over the book.
Same. Yeah. I enjoyed both, and I think if I did not see the movie, I would have said that the book is perfect. But then seeing how the movie wrapped some things up towards the end, it was better.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was like abnormal almost, because normally you always say that the book is better.
Yeah.
And there I thought that the adaptation was really enjoyable.
I feel that way actually with most Neil Gaiman, though, because I preferred Coraline the movie over the book. I haven't watched Good Omens, the adaptation of that, but I did enjoy the book. But I have heard that the adaptation of Good Omens is better than the book. So I don't know. And I know that Neil Gaiman is perfectly fine with that, too. And he's actually admitted as much.
That's incredible. I've never read a single book by him.
Oh, Ocean at the End of the Lane. That's one I'd recommend.
Everyone says that's really good.
An audiobook, because he narrates it. And that is the audiobook that made me a believer in audiobooks. I was very skeptical. I was very anti-audiobook until I listened to that one.
I do love audiobooks.
It's incredible. At the time, I listened to it on CD because I didn't realize you could do apps. And I was just looking for every excuse to drive somewhere just so I could keep listening. It was so good.
Then you know it's a good one.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's the best experience.
Yeah. So what are some books that you think are your favorites, but that maybe you don't talk about a lot, or that people maybe don't associate with you as much?
I'm looking at my shelves right now.
Yeah, I need to look at my shelves too.
I don't even...
I think The Witcher maybe, for me, just because I read it pre-BookTube. So I loved it then, but I haven't really talked about it on the channel.
Oh yeah, okay,
And
that makes sense.
plus, a lot of people don't really like it that much. And I don't know if that's the fault of the adaptation, of the translation,
Mm-hmm.
because I read it in Dutch
Oh,
and
Oh,
I
that's
really loved it,
interesting.
which is, of course, also a translation. But
A
I
different one.
have
Yeah.
gotten, I think almost a year ago now, a friend of mine was letting go of a lot of books, and she gifted me two English versions of The Witcher. So I've been thinking of reading them back to back, the Dutch version and the English one, and seeing if it is really the translation or if I just have weird taste and I like The Witcher while most people dislike that series.
Cool.
I read all the Witcher books, like all of them. That was actually one of the last series I binged before I started a channel, or a few years, at least a couple years before I started a channel. And my enjoyment of those books was like this. I'd be like, I'm really, really enjoying this. And then a couple days later, I'm just not really enjoying this. And then it would just go up and down. And I think what spoiled it for most people, though I haven't played the game, I think it's the game. Because my husband was playing Witcher 3 specifically. He loves all the Witcher games. He loves the first one too, even though or the first two games, even though those aren't as popular.
Mhm.
But I could tell he was having a better time playing the game than I was reading the series.
Yeah.
At the same time, I did enjoy the series for the most part. I think that the character work is what stays with me the most because I still think about those characters. I still enjoy remembering some of the banter, especially with Dandelion and with Geralt, and the way that they would make fun of Geralt, and the way I don't know, I liked what he did with the characters. I really enjoyed that. But I think for me, it was just storyline wise, and it all kind of blurs together for me, and it didn't really satisfy me. Like the ending of it didn't really satisfy me.
Mhm. The ending was strange. And I
Mhm.
think maybe if I read it now, I would probably start nitpicking a little bit like, this doesn't make sense. But
Mm.
at the time, I was just along for the ride and I didn't really question, could this have been handled better? But for me, the third book was the best, and then the later ones were a little bit strange. But I
Mhm.
just really loved the humor. I laughed a couple of times out loud. I
Yeah.
really liked the interaction between the characters, and the plot. It wasn't the best, but I didn't really care either.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've read the short stories in the first book in that series, and I need to continue on, but it's been years now, so I don't know. I don't want to restart everything, But I've heard you don't really have to, so.
Hmm.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think that the short story collections at the start, they're really nice to get to know Geralt, get to know the world, but you don't really need to have a vivid memory of them to understand the main series.
Okay.
Got it. Yeah. I'm glad I
Oh,
read it though. I think it was fun,
Mhm.
for the most part.
yeah. What is one of your books or series that you think people don't really associate with you, but that you really love?
With me, oh man, I really don't know. I mean, I would say A Song of Ice and Fire, except we finally brought the attention to that because I never really, before we decided to do this read along / reread along, I just never had the opportunity to talk at length about that series. But now that we're doing the read along, now I think it's pretty clear that I love the series or I'm
Yeah.
excited about it. But that series it just completely blew me away. I'm trying to think if there's another book or series that I'm not thinking about. I'm sure there is, and I'm just blanking. But yeah, but I have read some Neil Gaiman, as I mentioned. I enjoyed my time with that. Um, of course, I love Malazan, but everybody knows that. I love First Law, at least what I've read so far. Everybody knows that. I've been really enjoying Jenny Wirtz this year, my introduction to that author.
Yeah.
I tend to enjoy, I think, more traditional fantasy than most people. I think everybody's more into the modern fantasy thing, and I can enjoy modern fantasy. I'm also really getting into R. Scott Baker's work right now, which I know, Yolene, you're reading next year.
Yes.
I'm really I always feel bad saying the word enjoy, but I'm really fascinated by it. I am just gripped by it. At the same time, I'm so not comfortable recommending it to anybody because it's like there's so much patriarchy in that series. The women are basically whores, and
Mhm.
They have no agency, and there's incredible brutality towards them, and rape, and it's actually the best written series I've ever read for characters who have no agency. No character has agency, and yet it's so fascinating. And I think it's because he knows how to write the anguish of characters recognizing their lack of agency. And I think that's part of what makes it so compelling. But it's just an intriguing series all around. I am completely fascinated by that right now.
Yeah, I am a little bit nervous to pick that one up because I tried Malazan this year and it didn't really work out. Even though I enjoyed it, I just didn't have the brain space at this time to really. It's a series you need to prioritize.
You're not going to have a hard time with the Prince of Nothing trilogy.
Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah,
Ralph said something similar, so this is encouraging.
It's not as hard because you have way fewer characters. It's a much more linear storyline than Malazan for the most part. I think he is I'm predicting he's doing something with time, maybe. I mean, there is a little bit of something intriguing he's doing with time. I think you could see that from book 1, but it's not told in a way that you're like, what timeline am I in? What continent am I in? What characters am I following? What storyline? It's not like that. It's definitely not because the way that Steven Erikson writes, it's almost like, I think AP described it one time as almost like a series of short stories. And that's kind of the format he takes. And that's not how Baker writes at all. So I'm finding it way easier to follow the storyline. At the same time, there's complexity there. There's definitely complexity there. There's definitely some subtle things happening with I don't know. There's just some subtle things happening with the story work, and there's a lot of philosophy, but I don't think this philosophy will be too hard for you at all. I don't think it's above your level of intelligence at all. And I also think, what's the other thing about it? He does take a lot of inspiration from history, like Byzantine history and the First Crusade, I think. And anytime, like the Baker commenters, because that's the cool thing about entering a new series. I talked about this in my video yesterday. Like anytime you start a new series, what's cool is that you get new commenters from that series who are fans of that series. You get introduced to a new fandom. And the Baker commenters on my channel so far have been they've left such intelligent, thoughtful comments. But they are very kind in like saying, you should check out this video to get more context or this. So there's a lot of influence. There's a lot of things. There's a lot of layers to it. But as far as following the story, I don't think you're going to have a hard time.
Okay, that's great.
That sounds like a really good series, actually.
It is.
Come along, Johanna.
Yes, here I come.
Very, very, very bleak. Like you don't have any humor. There is some humor, but it's like a sardonic type of humor here and there, and it's just tragic. It's harrowing, and
you're using all my buzzwords: time, tragic, harrowing.
Yeah. I just know. I mean, like I know I have one friend on BookTube who just wasn't there for it. Wasn't there for the treatment of women. Like that's the hardest part. And I've actually, even when I did my first review of the first book, I actually had a ton of male commenters say, I cannot handle the way women are treated in this series. Wow. Like, I just can't handle it. It's just not okay. So it really crosses a line for some people. It goes into very vulgar content. So you got to be able to stomach it. But it's not like First Law, where you can laugh at things and have a lightness there. It's definitely different. But at the same time, I'm just fascinated with so many things he's doing and the exploration of consciousness and the psychology of the characters, and even just the atmosphere of the Holy War is really intriguing.
Oh, that does sound really, really cool.
Sorry. I'm like, this is amazing, but don't read it.
The best sales pitch I've ever heard. It's amazing, but don't read it.
I really am the worst about that.
Cool. Well, Evie had a question for us, which was, what's the single favorite new to you fantasy book that you've read this year?
Single. Ooh.
Single.
Wow. Evie, hard bargains with Evie. I need to look at what I've read, to be honest, because I don't remember. Like, I had that like little slump, you know, and then
Yeah.
new to you fantasy book because I read Hob, but I'd already read Hob before.
Mhm. Well, I think I have one because I also read Hub, I read Ken Lu, but those are continuations of series. And I'm probably going to feel bad that I forgot one. But what I'm currently reading, I think is going to be, well, it will be in my top 10 for sure. And I think that it's an author that I've never tried before. And now I feel like an idiot that I haven't tried him before. But that's Guy Gavriel Kay. And
Oh.
I have been reading A Brightness Long Ago, and I'm really enjoying it.
Wow.
It's yeah, I don't know why I have put it off for so long because everybody was saying, well, if you love Robin Hobb, you're probably going to like his works as well. And well, they were not wrong. I'm
I
really
feel like this is
enjoying
Jake Bishop's chat right now with Hob and yeah.
it. Exactly. Well, it was actually his video because he has a whole video of where could you start with Guy Gavriel Kay. And
Mhm.
well, this is the book that I physically own. And I just
Okay.
bought it a couple of years ago because I liked the cover and I really like the title as well, A Brightness Long Ago. But I have heard some people say, well, it's not the best place to start. You should start somewhere else. And then on Jake's video, he said, you can start here. It's a standalone. I wouldn't say it's the best place, but it's fine to start. So I just
Okay.
decided to give it a go.
Great.
Nice. Yeah, I still need to read Guy Gavriel Kay for sure.
Me too.
It's a big goal. I don't know about new to me. I mean, the only ones that are coming to mind right now are To Ride Hell's Chasm, maybe by Jenny Wirtz, because that was new to me from that author. And with that one, I always have to say, like, I'm the worst because I can never just like be like, everybody read this book. I do love the book. I think that I do have to be honest, though, that it took me a while to get adjusted to her prose. Not that she's not a good writer, she's a very good writer, but her way, her approach to writing, it's just there was a lot of formality to it, a lot of archaicisms, and it took me a good 90 pages, I would say, to get into the story for some reason. I'm not sure why, but then once I hit the 90-page mark or so, I had a just flow experience with it and I loved it. I thought it was a brilliant, brilliant standalone. And then the other one is, of course, Assassin's Apprentice being, I don't know which one is my favorite of the Farseer trilogy because I am all over the place with my feelings about it, but I loved the Farseer trilogy and I could easily see myself rereading the whole trilogy.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Of course.
I think for me it's going to be Babel by R.F. Kuang, and I know that book is getting especially a lot of attention right now with some stuff that's been going on. But as someone who speaks multiple languages, it actually went into discussions that I've asked myself so many times about languages and just, for example, Jolien, you were saying about The Witcher that you said you loved it, but you don't know if it's because you read them in Dutch and how it would compare if you read them in English. And so those are things I always wondered if I'm reading a translation of something, how close is this actually to the author's original, text? And can you say you love an author's prose if you're reading a translation and all of that?
Wow.
And how like see now I was going to use a French word. How I'm blanking. How true to the original can something be, and how true to the original meaning is something when you have a translator that comes in between. And so I just love that. I love thinking about languages and talking about it because it's something that there's words that are not that you can't use in another language and they're the perfect word to describe something. And then sometimes you just blank and you're like, no, but there is a perfect word to describe exactly what I'm feeling, but it's not in this language. So then it's always interesting because then you have to explain it or just go for something that's somewhat, for example, the word overwhelmed. I don't think there's another word like overwhelmed in any language that I know. And so when I'm trying to tell someone that I'm overwhelmed, in French, you would have to say that you're stressed. I'm like, but it's not stress, it's overwhelmed. It's different. And then it just doesn't exist as a word. So yeah, so that's why I really like Babel because of that.
That's cool.
I still need to read Babel, and then Jenny Wirtz is an author that I want to try. I know that Steve is also going to read her entire series, like the main series that she has
really?
next year.
Cool.
Yeah, but it's too much for me to take on. So I think that I will try to get my hands on her standalone first.
To Ride Hell's Chasm, yeah.
Yes, I will give that a try. And then Babel, I've wanted to try just because I liked the Poppy War by her. And I think that what I've heard so far from people who go in with the right expectations, they have really enjoyed the book. But
Yeah.
I've seen that somebody on Book Talk or Twitter said that they expected a cozy story, and
That's weird.
Don't.
yeah, that's not what you're going to get, I think.
I would
No.
never expect a cozy read from R.F.
Oh, I
Kuang.
thought, oh,
No.
okay.
I did read Babel. I wasn't as crazy about it, though. I do love the conversation about translations. I think that
Yeah.
that is such an important topic, and it's one that's very, I think it's one that we don't really talk about enough just in book circles. I know some people don't even want to read translated works at all, which I think is a shame. I think we should still read translated works, even if we're not able to speak that language or anything. I did not care for the story as much. I thought it was okay. It did not, and I think it was less to do with what she was trying to explore and more the way she executed the story that didn't work for me. I didn't really feel like the characters or the plot or the way she approached some of the moments some of the high peaks in the story really worked for my reading taste. But at the same time, like, it does bring up some really important conversations, and she clearly did a lot of research for the book. So
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
I also forgot one.
Go for it.
Cashil's Dart by Jacqueline Carey,
yeah,
which is also a surprise hit. And that's also one that I am going to reread next year because I was asked for a read along. And I know that I said that I was not going to be persuaded to start another read along, but for Kashil, I have time for that.
when are you doing that?
It's with Voyage Through Words. I think that her name is Sarah. She is either in Germany or also a European booktuber. And she was going to start in January with 2 months per book. But I've read the first 2 books already. So for me, the start will be slow. And then when we finish with The Song of Ice and Fire, I will need to get to the 3rd and the 4th book.
That
Got
makes
it.
sense.
Yeah, cool.
That is really cool.
Yeah. Another one I really loved that I read this year that surprised me, and actually, I kind of had the opposite situation with Babel with this book. Oh, no, and that's not really true. I don't think that I should even do that. But I'll say this, Vita Nostra, that book was so good. Yes. It doesn't deal with the theme of translations as much, but it does deal with language. And so I really highly recommend it. It's dark academia. And I think, I'll be honest, I think that part of the reason, not the only reason, but part of the reason I had some struggle with Babel is I kept on comparing it to Vita Nostra, because I really think Vita Nostra I just like preferred the writing style much more in Vita Nostra and the approach to feeling very close to the character. And but the thing is with Vita Nostra, the only thing that makes me hesitant from wanting to gush more about it is I did feel like the ending of that book made me feel kind of empty. I don't know if you've ever read the end of a book and felt kind of like
Fool's Errand. Yes.
Oh, okay.
I finished that last Sunday, and I think I sobbed on everyone's Discord for like an hour. But yeah, when you feel empty at the end, but that's such a good feeling.
Oh, okay, good. Well, that's the thing, because I felt like an existential kind of, But at the same time, as I felt that way, I kind of wanted to feel, because I don't know, I guess I like to feel like a state of joy or wonder or wow kind of feeling at the end. And I didn't feel the wow. I just felt like, oh, wow. Like, no, not wow. But I felt like that makes sense. That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't really have a peak experience with the end, if that makes sense too. But at the same time, I think it's still well worth the read. And that ending, like I said, it really fits where the story is going. It really fits. It goes deep into language in a unique way. It's very unique. It's magical realism too. You have to keep that in mind though.
I do really want to read that. That sounds amazing. Someone just here read it as well, of The Betrayals, but I think it's better. Okay. Actually, The Betrayals is the book by the author who wrote The Binding, which I think is a very underrated book, which I really love The Binding. So.
Yeah, same. And I was actually extremely surprised because I hear 2 or 3 people talk about it on BookTube, and that's it.
Mhm.
So I wanted to put it in my like underrated fantasy books with less than 5,000 ratings on Goodreads, and then on Goodreads it had like 70,000 ratings. So I don't know why nobody on BookTube is talking about it. Apparently on
Wow.
Goodreads people know about it. But I
Wait,
think that it's more like literary fantasy. It's not really written like fantasy that's more traditional. So it's written in a literary sense. I think that most people who are not fantasy readers pick that one up and enjoy it.
Oh, that makes sense. I love that book. I think it was also picking it up at the right time and just being really in the mood for something like this. And I hadn't, so every time I tell someone about this book, I said, don't read the synopsis because I feel like it spoils something that's very, very big. And so I haven't even read the synopsis of her second book, The Betrayals, because I just don't want to know what it's about. But I trust her. I want to read that book also.
Yeah, I think somebody said with the binding, and I want to say it was Sophia, who's been on your channel before. I want to say it was her that I saw a long time ago say that the challenge with that book is if you read the synopsis, you'll think the book is about one thing, but then you read it and it's not what the synopsis promises. And so people get disappointed because they get excited about the synopsis, but that's not what the book focuses on. But then I've heard that the book is really good.
It
Yeah.
is. It really is.
Yeah, I agree.
I haven't heard of that book.
No.
Same.
But maybe I should check it out. I always tell Evie Evie's we've decided is my guinea pig because if Evie likes something, I am almost guaranteed to like it because we have very, very similar taste. But I think there are some books I've enjoyed that she hasn't, but for the most part, Evie and I align a lot on our taste in books, a lot.
Yeah, I was watching your chat, and that's what you were saying.
Yeah.
I think Evie is also very good at knowing if you're gonna like a book or not, because there's stuff where Evie has read, and then she'll be like, "No, but I don't think you'll like it." And she's very good at knowing your taste, I find.
Really? Oh, that's
Yeah.
cool. That's a cool talent. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like or I think Angela has the same talent where she'll talk to you and she'll be like, "Yeah, I like this book, but I don't think it's gonna work for you. So you should read this one instead." You know? So
yeah, that's a really good talent.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think Evie's gushing of The Realm of the Elderlings just has me so excited to continue that series because I really did love Farseer. So I want to continue on so badly.
I need to have Evie on the channel to talk about Robin Hobb. Absolutely,
Sure.
because
yes.
I read Fool's Errand. I finished it last Sunday. I had half the book left, and I was like, you know what? I'm not getting off this couch until it's done. And so I sat down, and I'd had a chat the night before on my channel with Jolien and Scott and Sophia and Darian. We're talking about it. I was like, I'm going to finish the book. And they're like, yeah, you should. I was like, oh, nothing bad can happen in this first book in a trilogy. It's just the first book in a trilogy, you know? What could possibly go wrong? Man, was I wrong. And I've cried in books before.
Yeah.
But I have never cried like this.
Wow.
Like uncontrolled sobbing. I had like snot coming out of my nose. Everything. It was like I was wearing a shirt, and at the end, the whole sleeve was disgusting from tears and snot, and I just couldn't move on reading. And I had the audiobook on, and I just couldn't hear the audiobook because I was crying so hard. And I was like, this is horrible. Why did no one warn me? They're like, oh, because then the impact is lessened. I'm like, I don't care about the impact.
Wait, so this is the book one in which one?
In Tawny Man.
In Tawny Man, and that's Fool's Errand? Or
Yeah,
Fool's Errand.
Exactly.
Okay.
I just I don't know. It's just like Robin Hobb is so good at just like taking your heart and like squeezing it and just destroying it. It was
Wow.
I would love to say that it gets better. It doesn't.
You see, this
Realm
is
of the Elderlings is like the only series where I listen to audiobooks when I drive to work, and sometimes like a tear will escape, but it's fine. With Robin Hobb, I have to pull aside because I can't, especially when I wear glasses. Like they start to dampen and I can't see anything. So it's really just not safe to continue driving. And that's the only author where I have that experience.
And though her audiobooks
enjoy reading her books.
Yeah.
So
Oh, I'm so glad that I picked up Farseer this last year. I think it was perfect timing when I picked it up too, because I had been reading at that time. I was reading a lot of books that felt very up in the head, and that could be its own aesthetic. That could be fun. But I felt like I wanted something to bring me down into my heart. And that's when I knew it was time to to read Robin Hobb. And so I read Assassin's Apprentice, and immediately I felt that connection. Immediately I was like, yes, this woman is brilliant because she knows how not only to write incredible stories and do incredible world building. And well, actually her world building is like a whole conversation because she does it in such a masterful but like subtle way and incredible character work, but she knows how to pull you into your heart with her characters and with her stories. So I've just been so impressed with the way she's been able to do that.
If you feel that way after reading Farseer, so it's Farseer and then comes Live Ships, right?
Yeah.
And so as much as I really loved Live Ships, which we talked about last week, I love those characters, I love the world, I love everything, what it does to the world. The second I picked up Fool's Errand, so it's the first book where we're back with Fitz and Night Eyes and everybody in the Six Duchies, I just started crying just because I was back with them.
Oh, wow.
You know? And I was just so happy to be back, and I was just so emotional, and I just, it felt like coming home almost. And I it's what you were saying, she just pulls you in with the characters, and it's just an experience like unlike any other, I find, you know?
Yeah.
And
but I would say
I'll go for it.
That when I finished Farseer, I just felt extremely attached to Fitz. So I wanted to read Tawny Man straight ahead. And a lot of people said, no, read Live Ship Traders in between. It's going to be better, trust me. And I actually had a hard time getting into Ship of Magic because I was almost mad that it didn't have Fitz in the book.
Yeah.
But afterwards, when I then got back to Tawny Man, it is important to have that break because you also have a time without Fitz, and then seeing him back just improves the reading experience. And Live Ship Traders is also amazing. So
it is so good. Yeah. Such a good trilogy.
Wow.
Yeah, I think that I don't know, her books, which, you know, I love Brandon Sanderson, as we were clearly saying earlier, but there's something that with Hobb that she does where I love Brandon Sanderson, I love his characters, but there's something she does that no other author has been able to do yet, except for, of course, George R. R. Martin. But I'm so attached to those characters that the second I read it, I'm like, I love these characters so much. Just reading the first sentence, we should start back, I'm like, yes, I'm ready. Let's go. You know?
Wow. Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy. I'm going to try Wars of Light and Shadow again. Because I know, Paramita, you weren't super crazy on it the first time.
What's Wars of Light and Shadow? What's the first
book?
book?
It's the first book in Jenny Wirtz's series.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's Jenny Wirtz's series, Wars of Light and Shadow.
Okay.
So the first book is The Curse of the Mist Wraith, and which I did read this last year and really enjoyed. But it's again the more traditional fantasy. Again, I think everyone has a different experience with Jenny Wirtz's prose. So like, whereas with Robin Hobb, I feel like Robin Hobb is very readable, and at the same time, it's beautiful. Like she has a really good balance of keeping it feeling fantasy and traditional fantasy, having an incredible command with her language, and at the same time, she's still accessible. I think she's accessible. Yeah. With Jenny Wirtz is an incredibly skilled writer. She's very purposeful with her language. In The Wars of Light and Shadow, she has a whole glossary. She built a whole language for her world with a pronunciation guide and everything, with root words. So she's very, very, very talented. She drew her own map. She's an artist. She does her own cover art. She's very, very skilled. However, I think that her type of prose it's definitely something that I think is an acquired taste for some people. Yeah. Okay. I know some people really struggle with it. And I think it's usually an experience for many people, not everyone. I think it's a common experience for many people that they struggle with it for a while, and then they'll slowly start to get into it and start to like it, kind of like Tolkien, like how Tolkien reads now. For a lot of modern readers, Tolkien's writing feels almost antiquated to them at first, and then they start reading and they get used to it and they start loving it, and then they don't really want to go back. So it's kind of like that.
Okay. And is the series in itself difficult to follow? Like, is it epic with different places and different characters and need to keep track, or is that doable?
I think it's so far, like I've only read book 1, And as far as I could tell from book one, it's very doable. I mean, it does seem to cover a wide stretch of area of the world. She does have a pretty well realized broad world, but I don't feel like it's been too hard to follow. As far as that's concerned, I don't feel like, and we are following mainly two princes who are half brothers, and one is the Prince of Light and one is the Prince of Darkness. And you see how, one's like the Dark Prince is like this bastard pirate guy, kind of the edgy guy, and then the Prince of Light is from a more noble upbringing, and he's blonde, and you see how they interact with each other. And she, I think, actively works to try to subvert your perception of light and dark, and apparently the way the stories unfold, she keeps on taking your assumptions about things and twisting them again, and making you think how you feel about something, and then showing you another perspective. Like, she's big about that.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And
Yeah, very talented writer. I really enjoy her. I personally her writing really works for me personally. I just know that that's kind of an adjustment for some people. And I also think, and I don't know if this is the case, but I know for me, being a visual reader, somebody who visualizes vividly what I read, I also feel like her prose comes to life in my visual mind. So, yeah, I really enjoy it. The only challenge, though, is that we don't have audiobooks for them. So you would have to read them visually if you read them. Yeah.
Okay.
So recommending Sullivan alongside with Martin, Hobb, and Abercrombie is like a guaranteed way of making me want to start his books. I own the first book, which Age of Myth, I think it is. I own that one, but I haven't read any Sullivan yet.
Yeah, I think he has the Age of Myth or the Age of Legend series, and then he has the Royce and two best friends, something.
Royce, something like that, yeah. Yeah.
And I think that most people say that you need to start there, even though the Age of Legend series is actually earlier in that world.
Oh, okay.
But I'm more interested in the Age of Legend series. So
yeah. That's why I own the first book. I thought I wanted to start there. I think Johanna was also saying that it's cool to start there because kind of if you read Mistborn Era 1 first and then you read Mistborn Era 2, you see them talking about the characters of the first era as religious figures and just almost legends. But if you read, because you followed them, you're like, no, we were there. We know how this actually went down and what they were thinking, And so I think that's what Shoshana said, that with this series, it's kind of like that. If you read Age of Legends, whatever, first, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, John, I think I saw in one of your, I don't know if it was a Y Reads or if it was on a discussion you were invited to on someone else's channel, but I think you mentioned liking time travel stories, but not having found a lot of good ones. And that's absolutely my case as well. I love time travel. So what's your guys' experiences? Because I'm looking for like the time travel recommendation that will finally work. So.
Oh, that's kind of tricky. Because some of my favorite time travel stories are ones that I don't know would appeal to people who are not from the US, oddly. So like 11/22/63 by Stephen King, that might be my favorite. I'm not sure. It's one of my favorites. And that one I love, but I'm so hesitant to recommend it to people who didn't grow up in the US and don't have like that association with that era of history that I did with the JFK assassination. I think you could still enjoy it. I know Kyle from is it Reads by Kyle? I can't remember his channel name ever.
Yeah.
Kyle, you all know Kyle.
Yeah.
I know he loves the book. He absolutely loves it, and he claims over and over again it doesn't matter because he's Canadian. But I know a few people who are Canadian and didn't quite click with it as much. Like, for example, Sarah Reads, and Sarah is a huge Stephen King fan.
Yeah, she is.
And she feels like, well, one, she's not a big fan of time travel, but two, she feels like she didn't have that connection with that era of American history. And then the other one, kind of also related to American history, is Octavia Butler's Kindred, which I also adore. But that's also very American history related with the slave trade and everything. And then I'm trying to think of other ones I loved because they're probably all escaping me now. Yeah, that's a tricky thing. I will try to think about it though, Joanna. Let you
If
know.
you have recommendations, let me know. Someone recommended the Lycanius trilogy here, which is definitely on my radar of series I want to read. I didn't know it was a time travel story at all,
Yeah.
and I've always been interested. And Abby read it this year, and she didn't tell me it was time travel, so now it has
Yeah,
gone
I've
up.
I've heard great things of that series as well. I actually own the entire trilogy, even though I don't think that I'm going to read them anytime soon. But
Yeah.
I also heard that if you like Wheel of Time, it's a little bit like it, but
Mm-hmm.
more better for people who think that Wheel of Time just takes a little bit too long.
Hmm.
Lycanius is the better option.
Did you
Ah,
two read Wheel of Time? I don't remember.
I haven't.
Okay.
I DNF'd it.
Yeah,
At
I'm
which
too
book?
scared. I'm way too. It just doesn't sound like it would be my thing.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like your thing, you know.
No.
How
Yeah,
far
it's
did you
it's
get
one of
into it?
those series I picked up when I was new to BookTube, and everybody said if you like fantasy, pick up Wheel of Time. It's the best
Yeah.
thing you've ever read. That's something that you just need to read. It's a staple. And now, looking back, I knew in advance that that was not my type of book. But I was just so new to fantasy that you just pick everything up that anybody recommends. And now you know there are some buzzwords, there are some anti buzzwords, and you have an idea of your own taste. But when you start, it's difficult.
Mm. And how many books did you say you read?
For and I think at this point, if I would have started, I probably would have DNF'd it after the first book, probably.
Wow.
Okay.
Wow. That's a pretty big commitment. Yeah. I think I'm a little bit I think I'm hesitant because I watched Brittany from Books with Brittany. I watched all her vlogs of reading Wheel of Time and
Yeah.
saw how burned out she got. So burned out on fantasy after that, and
That's true.
I just couldn't do it. I was like, no, I just can't do that. I just don't think I could do that.
Yeah, I
Mhm.
don't see. I don't know because on the one hand, I want to read them because I want to read Brandon Sanderson's books that he
Oh
wrote,
yeah. Mhm.
and I really liked book one because it was a time I read it when the Amazon series came out, and I thought I don't want to read these books, you know. Someone gifted me like the first seven. You can tell they're back right there, and so I was like, well, I do own them now, so I kind of have to read them. But I started with the show, and then the last week between the second to last episode and the last episode, I read the first entire book in that week. I thought, oh, that was actually fun and stuff. And I read the second book and I had a good time, but I liked it less. And then I just keep on hearing these things and like the slog, and it's just like, do I want to do this? It's a commitment, you know?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Where I think, for example, Malazan is more intimidating. It is less books, but still they're very big books. So might as well be the same amount, I guess. But that series, I think I would actually really love. So
Mhm.
wouldn't I rather read those, you know? So
Yeah.
it's always a question.
Yeah, it's a really tricky thing to know. I mean, I know Evie is great at figuring out people's tastes. I still feel like it's tricky, like with me with Malazan, for me to know if somebody's going to love Malazan or not. It's just really kind of tricky.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I guess
Yeah, and
oh, sorry, go for it.
um, I think that that's true for most long fantasy series, just
Mm.
because for me, for example, the first book in Wheel of Time, it was fine. It's not that I disliked the series. It was not that after those first four books, I thought it was a bad series. Just not good enough to invest for years. Because that's 15 books. I could read 5 trilogies in the same time space.
Yeah.
So the longer the series is, the more it needs to grab me. And
Yes,
for
Mhm.
some people, they don't mind. They say, oh, the longer the series, the better, because then I can really get to know that world and I love it. For me, I like shorter series. And if it's
me too.
longer, it needs to be worth it.
Oh, I'm the same way, Yolene. I'm
Agreed.
the same exact way. I think the Realm of the Elderlings, well, I do love Robin Hobb enough that if Farseer was a 10-book series, I might consider it. I'll be honest. But for the most part, it actually does. It was a huge motivator knowing that she broke up the Realm of the Elderlings
Yes.
in several
Same.
series. I'm not really I don't really have a big interest in long series. I enjoyed Dark Tower. That was another longer series that I read this last year. But honestly, my favorite book was book 4, and I enjoyed the other books after it, but it never reached that level for me after
Mhm.
book 4. Um, I'm glad I continued it. I'm not saying I regret it or that it's not worth it, but I think that for me, the trilogy is a sweet spot. The trilogy is a
Yeah.
sweet spot.
The trilogy is the sweet spot. I agree. And exactly what you two were saying, if it's gonna be a very long series, it better be really good and just do something for you, you know? Because That's why exactly what you were saying, Joanna, with the Realm of the Elderlings. Not only is it broken up into different series, so it's kind of easy to stop and go, if you will. But
Mhm.
even if I am planning to read them pretty much back to back, it still feels fresh and new every time. And I love her characters. I love her world. I love everything. With the Wheel of Time, it's even less books than her books. And I'm like, I like knowing there is this part called the slog. It's just like, but do I want to do this to myself?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've been so scared of I'm gonna get in so much trouble with Alan, but I'm always in trouble with Alan on every
You
live
are.
show. Every single one. I was gonna say I've been a little bit nervous to pick up Books of Babel because it's a 4-book series, and I know that's not that bad, but I don't know why. Like it just is when I hear the mixed reviews about the 4th book. Though I know he loves it, and I don't usually follow what the majority feels anyway on some books, so I can see myself still loving it, but it still makes me uncomfortable.
See,
Or nervous.
with that series, I loved book 1 and 2. I loved them like so much. Book 3 I really liked as well, and then I just did not like book 4.
Oh no.
And
Yeah,
the
that's
thing is,
good.
I was talking to Sophia about this. I was like, you know what? I feel like I should reread the Books of Babel just to see. Maybe I read book 4 and I wasn't in the right mood. And I was like, right now, I cannot make myself reread those books.
Wow.
And so, yeah.
That's sad. Did it feel like it kind of made you negate what you read before, or was it?
Not really. It just left a bitter taste. I don't know. It's just that last book I just thought was so boring. And I don't know. By the time that we were past the part that was so boring to me, I was like, I'm done.
Yeah.
And I was just kind of reading it because I wanted to finish it and see. But again, maybe one day I'll get back to it. But I do know that I loved Armor of the Sphinx so much and Senlin so much. So I guess we will see. So
And Evie is telling me that I'll love it. So
So
I guess I
there
should
you
give
go.
it a shot. Yeah. I haven't read book 1 yet, but I should give it a shot.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think it helps to hear if there are arcs in a bigger series too. Because I know, like with
Yeah.
Wars of Light and Shadow, which I have committed to reading, I'm reading that whole series with some people. So I'm doing a read along with that. It did help to hear from Janny too that I think I cannot remember how the arcs are divided. I even have a paper she sent me to show me, but it is divided into a few different arcs. So I'm like, yay, that helps a lot.
That's nice. Yeah. It's kind of like Stormlight, where you know it's a 10-book series, but really it's 5 and 5.
Yes.
So it's kind of it helps. Or Mistborn with the different eras.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But see, then there's this comment. There you go. And I'm not ready for this. I'm not going to reinvest all that time. You know?
It does seem like there are two camps. Either the people who are extremely disappointed by that ending, or people who really liked it. There's no in between.
There is no in between. There's the 1 stars and then there's the 5 stars.
Yes.
When that happens, I usually fall in the middle anyway. Like with the Dark Tower series, like the ending, apparently when it was published, maybe it's less so now, but when it was published, it was very divisive. And now I read it and I was like, I thought it was okay and it worked and I couldn't see it ending any other way. But at the same time, did it like make me cry and like, was that the best ending ever for me? No. It was okay. It worked. You know, it was okay. It was cool.
So what would you two say is what makes you love a fantasy book? Is it, for example, I was talking with Sophia about this because Sophia and I talk every day and sometimes we just, what do you think makes a good book, you know? And so we were talking about, because when you read specifically fantasy, you have the world, you have the magic, you have characters, you have plot, you have prose. So what makes you really love a fantasy book series or story?
For me, it's definitely the characters. And even to a point that if the characters are interesting and I can relate to them and just feel a connection, even though I can see that sometimes they're horrible people, if I can be in their head, I can see their POV, I understand why they do the things they do, I don't even care about the plot that much. And that's why an ending of a series, I'm usually also like, oh, yeah, that's fine. I don't even think about how it could have been different because the plot is not that important to me. Sometimes I'm in the middle of a series and I start thinking, what is the plot actually? Is there even a plot? Because that's just not my main focus.
Mm-hmm.
And with prose, it's the same. If prose is enjoyable and if it's beautiful, all the better. If prose is horrible, of course, that's also not what we want. But if it's just a means to convey the story, that's fine by me. But if I don't like the characters, I can't continue reading.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I want to say a couple of things. So it's really tricky. I don't feel like I could just say one thing or another.
Mm-hmm.
I think characters are important to me. I think themes are important to me, but I
I was
think of
just, you're a theme
themes.
reader.
Yeah, I do. I love themes. I really do. But I feel like the themes are because those are kind of like the outer. I see the themes as almost like giving me a sense of something even bigger than the characters in a way. But at
Mm-hmm.
the same time, I feel like theme is often explored through the character. So it's often explored with what the character is struggling with. So if the character is struggling with betrayal, or like in Babel, the character is struggling with having a multicultural identity, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're struggling with, is violence a means to an end? Is it the only path? But it's what they're struggling with that you see the themes emerge, you
Mm-hmm.
know, and so even the theme of translation, everything, it comes through the character. And so I feel like the character is very at the heart of theme for me.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, related to that, and this is where it gets tricky, I also have a hard time. I think it also depends though on the type of story it is. So like I was talking about this with Jimmy, I think a couple of weeks ago on his channel on Chatting with Nuts about how like the Dune characters, for example, I love the Dune series so far, but those characters can be described as flat characters. And I know that Philip Chase has often said flat characters serve a purpose. They can serve a purpose in a narrative. And you do see, I know with some series I follow, you do have your balance of flat characters and more rounded characters. And it's, I don't know, there's like an interplay of like how theme is also explored through that. And additionally, another thing though that I also really love in story, and I don't know that this is just fantasy, is, and I think this, but it does relate to fantasy in the sense of world building, is a sense of atmosphere or a sense of not just setting, not just describing what things look like in the world, but how the characters feel about those things.
Mm-hmm.
And in that way, creating a sense of tone with the character psychology and the setting. So, like the example I always like to give for this is like in The Lord of the Rings, if you read The Fellowship of the Ring, you read about the Shire and you read about, I cannot remember now, like Lothlorien, and you read about these settings, and they are so beautiful and mystical and otherworldly at times, or just fun and I don't know, just extraordinary beauty. But you're also in a part of the story where you have companionship, you have connection, you have you're in a safer part of the world, and so the characters are feeling safer, and you see that reflected in the tone of the setting. It's the character connected to the tone, connected to the setting. And then by the third book, everything is really dark, and the way he
Yeah.
describes nature and the textures being kind of almost like they could hurt you. I mean, there's something painful in the textures of the world and the way he describes the landscapes and everything, and that's also reflecting back to the character and what the characters are feeling and what the characters are experiencing. And so I feel like it's all, I just want an immersive experience in fantasy. That's my long
Yeah.
answer. I want an immersive experience in fantasy, and that has to do with feeling what the characters are feeling, and
Mm.
therefore the themes coming through them and what they're experiencing with the world and how that's affecting the tone of the story. And if one of those things is missing, then I sometimes have a struggle. Sometimes, not always. There's always exceptions. And as far as plot, I am probably not the most plot-driven reader. I'll be honest. I'm just not.
Same. I could honestly, if there's, like you were saying, Yulene, earlier, if there's no plot, I can be okay with it if all the rest is okay as well. And
Mhm.
that's something, for example, I'm going to be Evie here, and I'm going to bring it back to Robin Hobb. In Fool's Errand, the first half of that book, I was like, there's nothing happening, you know?
Yes.
You just reconnect with Fitz, and then he's like, oh, this is what I've been up to. Sup? You know, like just catching up on his life. and yet it's just so, it feels so cozy. It's like you're sitting there, you can picture yourself sitting in his little cabin with a cup of
Mhm.
some hot beverage and just listening, like, okay, tell me more, what's going on, while you caress Night Eyes, like great
Exactly.
stuff, great stuff. And I was talking to Sophia about this. The reason that we were talking about is because she read Babel, and she wasn't an absolute fan. And then because for example, she's not a themed reader, and for me, themes are very important as well. And so we were actually then ended up talking about the call pile system. I don't know if you have heard of that rating system.
I hate it.
And
Yeah.
and what did you say? Sorry.
I said I hate it, but yes, I do know about
Exactly. Thank you. Okay, so when I a few years ago when it came out, I was like, okay, I should try this. And so I rated a couple of books through the cop-out system. And then I'd get a rating. And I was like, no, this does not reflect how I felt about this book. Because, okay, I'm reading, for example, if you're reading Discworld, the logic is probably going to be very low because it's not meant to be a logical book. And so how can you then rate a book lower just because it's doing what it's supposed to do? It's just that, and it drove
Mhm.
me crazy.
Yeah.
And I feel like from exact what we were saying, for me, plot doesn't matter at all. So I cannot give plot and characters the same weight when I rate something.
Yes.
And so I hate that system. I'm like, nope, I can't do this. I'm done. So
Yes. I
yeah.
feel the
Mhm.
same way, Joanna. And I feel like we all have to be careful about not confining ourselves too much. I mean, it might be true in one sense that we are more character driven readers in some sense, like the three of us, for example. But it might be true in another sense that we read a book that we love, that it's maybe not the most character driven, and maybe
Yeah.
it's more plot driven. And I feel like it's important to have that openness because different authors offer different things. And so we're probably going to see some really cool books come out in the future. And I think that's important to have an open mind about. So, like, the example I always like to use is that there was this Faces documentary I saw many, many years ago, but it was so fascinating. And I still think about it all the time. And so, in that documentary, they were talking about the constructs of the human face and how, lots of different things, aspects of the face, and how we understand our world through looking at each other's faces. But one part of that documentary talked about these scientists created a template with the Pythagorean theorem, which is like 1 to 1.618 or whatever, where they created the perfect proportions that would, like, it was a series of lines, like a mask. And if a face, the more attractive a face looked, the more it would fit those exact proportions.
Mhm.
So they put the template over the face of Tom Cruise and it fit perfectly. Or they
Of
put it
course it did.
over like people who apparently had perfect faces and everything would line up. The eyes would be exactly where they should be, distanced the right amount of space away. This should be spaced this way, this space this way. And so they were saying, look, science shows what beauty is, that kind of thing. And I remember
Mhm.
at the time, I shared it with my mentor, a professor friend of mine, and he watched it and he said, I have a problem with this. And I said, what is it? He said, what we're saying when we look at this template, it was a template that you put over people's faces to assess whether they're beautiful or not. He said, the problem with this is you're almost saying beauty is in the template.
Mhm.
He's like, that's
Mhm.
not where beauty is. Beauty is in the face. It's not in the template. And when you do that, you're doing an extraordinary reductionary disservice to what beauty is, and being open also to different kinds of faces that maybe don't match that exact paradigm, but maybe are beautiful nonetheless. And so I feel the same fear with like the cop pile or certain rating systems. We're saying this is what good fantasy is. This is what
Mhm.
is good story. Maybe we're not being open enough to, maybe there are other types of story. Maybe authors are offering us something different. So I
Mhm.
get worried about that. And I do get worried, sorry, this is my rant, that we get a little bit like factory oriented in how writers should write. And
Mhm.
you should always subvert tropes and you should always start with as much action as possible. I'm not really, I could see how there are some good stories, maybe more than one that follow that, but I think it's important to just, have an open mind about, what constitutes a good story. Because like Robin Hobb, a lot of writers today are probably being advised don't write like a slow burn fantasy. And guess what? Robin Hobb is a slow burn fantasy, but man, she's been masterful at it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I
Yeah,
love what you're
I
saying about
agree.
keeping an open mind, because there's a book that I know you love as well, Piranesi.
Yeah.
I would never have thought I could love that book. And Sophia was like, I think you could like it. You should read it. I was like, you know what? I'm going to try it. It's not very long, so might as well. Ended up in my top of, what was it, last year? 2 years ago? Time
Yeah.
flies.
Yeah.
And that book is not at all what I usually tend to love. And yet, I went in it with an open mind and it became just one of my favorites. And so I agree with you. I think you should always go in with an open mind and let the authors do what they want to do. And then you get to decide if it works or it doesn't work for you. It's like with
Right.
food, like you can say, I don't like this. I don't like eggplant, for example. But I've had eggplant in certain dishes where it was pretty good. I was like, well, I don't despise this. So
Yeah.
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 Mhm.
Absolutely.
I also don't. I think thinking too much about ratings and trying to objectify what is good, what is bad, it takes a lot of the fun out of it. I don't really put that much weight to ratings. I like something, I give it 5 stars. I don't care if it's a masterpiece. Like Akatar, for example, I didn't give it 5 stars, but I enjoyed it for what it was. I can see its flaws. I still had a great time, and that's what I'm looking for when I'm reading. I don't need to write an entire thesis about it. So when I rate, that's just my feeling. If I don't like it, I give it 1 stars. And I don't really feel the need to have an entire justification for that. And I don't think that there should be either. So it's also why I think that, well, I almost never give stars because I know that I give way too many 5-star ratings, and then it's difficult for other people to have a feeling what I liked and what I loved. But if I would rate more, I would also rate DNFs. And I know that a lot of people think that that's horrible practice, but if you didn't like it, and I think that that's a good thing, to just let people know I didn't like it, so of course I'm going to give it 1 or 2 stars. And I think talking about it, like, well, yes, but you haven't seen it in completion, and that's why you can't really say anything about the book. An it's not fair. While so many people read a book, say, I loved it, I give it 5 stars. Why is that better than the other? I think it's just putting too much weight on ratings anyway.
Yeah. I agree with you, Yolene. I personally don't rate books for the same for the reasons that I described. And at the same time, I would never I actually really appreciate that, like on Goodreads, everybody can rate however they want and they could have their own system and their own rules about it. I would hate for that to be policed by anybody. I'm like, I just would hate that. I kind of like that it's more democratic in a way, even if it makes it a more unreliable thing in a way. By the way, I did rate Kashil's Dart 1 star after DNFing it. And see, I didn't finish it because I think that if I had finished it, I probably would have a different perspective on it. But because the things I had challenges with, you were telling me get better or aren't as problematic in the second half.
Yeah, but I think if you disliked it that much, or you had that much problems with it that you could not continue reading, why shouldn't you be allowed to rate it?
Oh yeah.
It's all fun. I've seen Robin Hobb. I think it's Robin Hobb. Maybe I'm lying here. But she said, well, when I give 3 stars to a book, some people said that I didn't like it. But no, of course, I think that 3 stars is a good book. It's a book that I would recommend to people. 4 stars means it's a favorite, and 5 stars means this is the best thing ever. I will keep rereading it until the day I die. A lot of people would say that 3 stars is a bad book. So ratings is so subjective anyway that why not just have fun with it and do your own thing?
Yeah,
I
agree. So do you I don't remember, do you two use ratings stars when you do wrap-ups or not? I don't remember.
I don't
rate
wrap-ups anymore. I don't rate anymore. I used to. And I personally just stopped doing it. Alan changed my name on his Discord to Johanna Hates Star Ratings. But I stopped doing it because for me, well, actually it was because of reading Malazan, honestly. Because I was reading Malazan, I'm like, I can't reduce this book to a star rating. Like, I just can't do it. Like, it does, I'll just give it 5 stars, then fine. But it's not that simple. Like, it's complicated, especially with there were a couple books for me that were very complicated as far as how I could come up with a rating about it. And so for me, it just made me too much in my head. And I felt like I was overthinking the rating even while I was reading. And so I just quit. And I was so happy. For me personally, I just felt liberated quitting the ratings because it didn't work for me. It was unreliable. it was reductionist for me. But at the same time, what Yolene said, 100% I validate that. Like, if you're going to rate, have fun with it. That is the most important thing. I will, even though Alan says I hate star ratings, I don't hate it for other people. If it's meaningful for you, if it's fun for you, then please keep doing it. And like I said, the last thing I'd ever want to do is police how people rate books too, you know?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I actually also don't rate unless I read a book that I loved. Then I go to Goodreads, finished it, 5 stars. But unless that's it, I just don't rate because I have felt in the past that when I did that, either everything was 4 and 5 stars, and then I started questioning myself, like, am I not critical enough? And it just took the fun away. And then I went back and I lowered my ratings, and now I'm looking back and I think, oh, that's too harsh. I don't want to think about that. Most books that I finish are 4 or 5 stars because otherwise
Why read?
I'm not having a good time.
Back to your question, Johanna. Why read? Like, if you're gonna, that's the thing. Is I have been struggling with star ratings as well because what you were saying, how it's like, if someone sees, I've had this actually happen to me. I don't remember which book. I finished it. I gave it 3 stars. To me, it's exactly what this is. 3 stars for me is a good book with flaws. Exactly this. And so I thought, oh, it's a good book. I like it, but not a favorite. And then I had someone comment on my rating saying, "Oh, you gave it 3 stars. I'm definitely not picking this up." And I was like, "Wait. That's not the intent, you know?" And so I have actually been thinking about next year not rating my books at all for the same reason you two mentioned, because it's just, yeah.
Yeah.
And then you go for it.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna say, if you then end up just rating everything 4 or 5 stars because you know your taste and you know you're picking things up that you like, then what's the point in rating them anyway? So.
Yeah. Yeah, and the other thing for me with ratings, and this was another reason I felt like I had to quit, is sometimes I would stop and I'm like, I have to wait to decide what I'm going to rate it. But that's the thing, is like, I feel like once I finish a book, I don't know if it's like this for you too, but I feel like going through the book is one journey. But then after I finish the book, I feel like I go through a whole other journey of processing what I read. And sometimes the initial high, it's like the initial buzz I receive from a book, it's kind of like a sugar high or something, and it's recency bias. And sometimes if I take more time away from a book after finishing it, I get to process my feelings more, and either I end up loving it more over time or it sticks with me less over time.
I agree. Absolutely. This is an experience that I definitely have. And that's where that a book, either you have the recency bias in one way or the other, right? So sometimes there's books where I'm like, yeah, it was good, but it wasn't a new favorite. And then sometimes months go by and you're like, oh, dang, I still think about that book all the time. And then it did something. Whereas there's other books that you finish like, great, 5 stars, amazing. And then 6 months later, like, what was that book again? I read that? Oh, I don't remember it, So
Yeah. And then our discussions too, like when we discuss books with others here on the channel, or we watch reviews and we're entering a part of a conversation after finishing a book, I feel like that also develops our thoughts and feelings even more after finishing a book.
Absolutely. I think that that's more than anything, it's what makes me reevaluate how I felt, because of course, I read a book with the lens of me. I use my experiences, my life, the way I think, the way I feel to read this book. And I always do this with fantasy books that I then go online and I look at, like, I finished Live Ship. I cannot tell you how many videos of Live Ship I watched after I was done.
Wow.
And I think I've watched probably 20 hours worth of Live Ship, live shows, discussions and stuff. Everything at a bit faster speed, but still, it was so many. And there are scenes in Live Ships where you're like, oh, I don't know how I feel about this. And then you hear people discussing said scenes. And you're like, oh, I see your perspective on this. And then you hear someone else who's like, well, I've actually experienced something like this. And this is and then it just opens everything up. And that's why I love buddy reading and I love read-alongs, because I think they heighten the experience of a book, a series, whatever, so much.
Yeah. It's interesting because, like with Farseer, months and months later, I had a discussion with Evie and with Derry about certain characters in Farseer, because I started to realize after finishing it, I did have a discussion of Farseer on my channel, but even after that, I was still like, I realized I just was not okay about some things that happened in that trilogy. And I was still processing it. And it was like months later, and we had a discussion, and it was amazing because I got to process even more thoughts. I'm like, wow, I am still thinking about this trilogy, and I'm still like processing it. But like you said, I love what you said about like when you read a book, it's your experience, it's your thoughts. But then when you share with others, you get whole other context, a whole other way of expanding your perception on things. And I find that discussions do so much for me as far as making me consider things I wouldn't normally consider.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
It makes
that's
you
the
love things.
it's the positive side of BookTube, especially because
Mhm.
I don't really know readers in real life, especially not readers who read fantasy. So it really increases your enjoyment, and especially if you're reading a series, it can also help. I always feel that I leave a conversation about a book in a series that I know more, and that I was the idiot who didn't understand anything.
Yeah.
And somebody else explains, like, yeah, I understand why you're angry, but look at it from this point of view.
Mhm.
Yes,
Yeah.
it is. And then you jump into the next installment with so much more information. And I feel like it just increases the enjoyment that you get out of reading. Normally you're
Mhm.
on your island and you only have like your own perspective, and then it opens it up to a group activity.
Yeah.
That was one of my favorite parts of reading Malazan in some ways. I mean, there were so many things I love about that series, obviously, but one thing that I loved were the discussions I had with my friends because I feel like every time we had discussions, like on Jimmy's channel with Jimmy and Alan and Philip and others, it would be fascinating to have one perspective of a character and then have somebody bring up a whole other side to that character, usually Philip, because he read the other books in the series or knew what was ahead. But it would always be fascinating how Erickson would just flip flop your perspective on it. He does that better than any other author I know. Whereas like Martin, he plays with your sense of morality by giving you a character who's really screwed up, and then puts that character within the company of a character who's even worse, and then making the other character seem redeemed in that way. I feel like
Mhm.
Martin is brilliant at doing that. Erickson is amazing at like giving you a character you think is detestable and a character that you think is the one you're rooting for, and then suddenly shifting your perspective and seeing why that detestable character is the way they are, why they're valid in what they're doing, and then the other character maybe not so much. And he is so brilliant at just making you rethink and rethink and rethink. So having those discussions also just enriches that perception even further. It just helps add more layers to what you're seeing and understanding.
Mhm. Yeah, for sure. That's why I think that it's hard to say. I'm always telling like I'm not gonna do any more buddy reads or read alongs just because, it's just so much commitment. But at the same time, it's what you were saying, Yolene, where that's the good part of BookTube. It's what I love the
Yes.
most because yeah, sure, I want to read this series when, like, for example, you were talking about Prince of Nothing. That's what it's
Mhm.
called.
Yes.
Yeah, you were talking about that, and it's been on my radar off and on. And then I'm like, oh, but knowing that you're going to read it next year, I'm like, but really, maybe I want to read it with her because then I could have someone to talk about it with. Whereas if I'm going to read it at some point alone, of course, I could then go back to you to be like, oh, you guys have read this, but it's not the same.
It's not the same. And I do think, by the way, that Scott is also going to read it.
Oh,
So
okay.
Yay.
Well, then I'm going to go buy the first book.
I can do too. I would love, and of course Scott too, but I would really, really particularly love as well to hear your two perspectives on it, because I don't feel like there are a couple, like there's Zara and Amanda, but there's not a lot of content out there of female booktubers talking about that series. It's much more male dominated. Same with Malazan, but I think the Baker series even more so. I don't feel like we get enough female perspectives. And I think that would be so wonderful. I would be there for it 100% to watch you two talk about it. So,
We should do it. There we
yes,
go. New buddy
perfect.
read. We already had another buddy read lined up as well. So
Yes,
yeah.
it's happening.
I feel like my whole year is going to be buddy reads. So
Hmm.
it's going to be
But it's
great.
fun. It's a fun thing of booktube, as long as you don't overwhelm yourself. That's
Yeah.
like the danger, because it is so much fun. You keep saying yes to everything, and then in January you have 12 books to read and 12 series
Yeah.
to start.
Yep. That's where I'm at kind of right now. But January, anyway, my priority is going to be, of course, Game of Thrones.
Hmm.
And I'm
Same.
starting what is it called? Grey Coats series with
cool.
a friend on Bookstagram. So
Yay.
that's going to be something, because I think it's going to be lighter, I think, than A Song of Ice and Fire. And then just, of course, continuing through Realm of the Elderlings. So, but yeah, it is hard to not overwhelm yourself. But at the same time, it's just so fun to discuss things with other people.
Yeah, it really, really is. It really is.
So are there any other things that you think make a favorite book for you, or any favorite books that you want to talk about that you haven't really gotten the chance to yet?
It's funny that you two talked about time traveling, because that's like my anti buzzword. If that's in fantasy, I usually don't pick it up because I don't like mixing genres. Like fantasy is fantasy, sci-fi is sci-fi, and sometimes it works, but usually I'm disappointed when I pick up a fantasy series and all of a sudden there's time traveling. I'm already like cooled down for the series, which is interesting because I am going to read Broken Earth by N.K. Jemisin, and I have since heard that it is a little bit of a genre bender with sci-fi elements as well as fantasy. So now I'm a little bit anxious, but at the same time, I think that Jemisin, from what I've heard of her, is an author who can pull it off in a way that I will enjoy it.
Yeah. I would say The Dark Tower has time travel in it too. And that's also the most genre defying fantasy series I may have ever read. So, but I hear you on that. I have heard, I can't really think of any other fantasy series that have time travel. Most of the time travel books that I enjoy seem to be sci-fi, or historical fiction sci-fi. I guess that would be the way to put it. But I can see what you mean.
There is one other book, but I think that that's also just my expectations gone wrong. But it's The Hunter's Oath by Michelle West. It's an older fantasy series, and it was, you have the lords and then you have the hunter god, and the lords are allowed to hunt in his woods, but once a year the hunter god hunts these lords, and one of these lords will die. But these lords also have a special connection with one of the villagers, and they have these big hunting hounds, and they also have a bond with those. So I thought, like, yes, animal companions. We have, this friendship between these lords and these villagers. It's going to be very character driven. And then all of a sudden, there was a lady in the book who time traveled, and that just threw me off. And I think that that's more of an issue of myself, that I was not expecting that. I was expecting like very traditional fantasy, but I should maybe retry that book. But it's the only one that I've encountered it that I was not expecting.
Isn't there some time travel in The Witcher though?
Yeah, but it's so weird, and at that point you're so far in the series and so many other weird things have happened that it's like, okay, I'm sure.
Right.
It is really weird. It is really weird the way he does that. I was not expecting it.
I didn't know that it was an element.
Yeah, it's like in the last published book, which is not the last book in this series, right? The Lady of the Lake, is that what it is? Or is it, am I thinking of something else?
It's The Lady of the Lake is the last book in the main series, I think.
Oh, in the main
and then
series,
you have
Season of Storms.
Season of Storms, which is it's later in its publication, but it's actually a prologue. But I read it last because I thought, well, if it's published later, I am going to read it in publication order.
Oh,
But you can read it before as well.
Yeah, I read it in publication order too, but we followed Scott's advice.
Yeah, exactly. Always publication order. So I have a question for you, which something you were saying, Jolien, you were talking about N.K. Jemisin, and that this prompted my question. Do you ever have this with books, that you love them with your heart and or with your brain? Like, where there's books, where like, I know I like my brain likes this book, but it's not in my heart, and vice versa. Do you ever have that?
Yes, I do.
I've had that with N.K. Jemisin, which is why that quite prompted my question. The fifth season, when I read it, it blew my mind, but it's not a favorite, and I don't love it. And I actually DNF'd the second book, and I don't know if I ever want to get back to it. So it's such a weird experience. It's like the first book was just like, whoa, and I loved it with my brain, but it just, yeah, it's such a weird experience.
I think that it's definitely an experience that I've had, but I just can't remember the ones that I loved with my brain, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because they just don't stick with me. And I think maybe, even though I then still enjoyed it, The Ninth Reign is one of those books. And I think that that's the reason that I still haven't continued with the series, even though I really enjoyed that first book. it just didn't really give me that extra feeling that it's
Mm,
like, I need to continue here.
I know what you mean. But see, that's the series I love with my heart. So it makes sense, especially after book 2. That's where I was like, okay, this is so great. This is also a bit genre bending, I find, as a series,
Yes.
so you have to be in the mood for that kind of stuff. So
Mhm.
Yeah.
makes sense.
That's a good question, though.
Yeah, it's hard to and then you try to explain to someone like, yeah, this book is objective, because you cannot say objectively. Again, there you go, because it's not really, there's no such thing as objectively good.
Yeah.
So
No,
Yeah, but
yeah.
there are a couple of series that I know are not as good, or what is conventionally seen as good, but I love them regardless. But it's
yeah,
difficult then to recommend them to, and every time that I then recommend them, I say, but you might hate it. While there are others that I can more confidently recommend
yeah,
because I know that they are objectively good. Like the writing quality is something that most people would enjoy. While something like Akatar, I always feel almost bad when I say, I really enjoyed this. And then you have somebody else who picks it up and says, no, this is really not for me.
yeah.
Yeah. I felt like the last one of the last audiobooks I listened to, Nettle and Bone by T. Kingfisher, I really enjoyed it actually for the most part, but I just hit a wall with it like at 3/4 in or something where I just didn't feel like interested in it, but it was more a mood thing. And
Mm,
so it's kind of a tricky thing because I'm like, well, I didn't feel like I loved it, but I really liked it. And I think I wasn't in the mood for it, but I could see that being a really great palate cleanser for a lot of readers.
hmm
Mhm. Yeah, I also read Nettle and Bone and I liked it, especially for a short fantasy. It's quick, it's a fairy tale, it's a little bit funny, there's a little bit of romance, it has a little bit of everything. But I didn't love it as much as I also read The Raven and the Reindeer by her, which is a Snow Queen retelling, and I loved that one.
Oh, wow.
So, but then it's also with this is a standalone, it's 200 pages. The investment is so low that if I just enjoyed it, that's enough for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is so funny because I started that audiobook like several weeks ago and then I took like several weeks with the last hour. I was like, I just don't feel like listening. Like you have an hour left. Come on.
yeah. And in that sense, sometimes it's when that happens with a book, like, ugh, how do I actually feel about this?
It was so bizarre. It was so bizarre because I did like it. I don't know. And I was like, it's very well written and I like the humor. And I don't know why I'm just like not that I think I was just, we just talked about not being plot driven and how I'm not plot driven, but I did feel that way. I'm like, I just don't know that I really care about this plot.
Yeah,
And for
that
some
makes
reason, it was like, it was becoming more about the plot after a while, I think. And I was just like, I'm just not really interested in this.
Mhm.
yeah,
I think it also, like the atmosphere changed so much. In the
Oh, that's
beginning, it was extremely dark, and I go, ooh, like
oh
this is going
yeah.
to be bleak. And then it was more action packed and a little bit funny. And
Mhm.
because of that, I was also not extremely invested in the characters. Like they were fine, but they were all over the place. So
mm,
then you start paying more attention to the plot. And towards the end, I thought that the plot took a little bit too long.
Yeah.
Okay, is it done now, or what's happening next? Because I didn't know what to expect because the atmosphere was all over the place.
That's a really good point, Yolene. That's a really, really good point. Because it felt like the characters did get quirkier as you read on in the story, but then it's like it suddenly made the investment in the plot feel like, come on, let's just get is this really that big a deal anymore?
Yes.
yeah.
That makes sense. And it does start off kind of darker too, or more atmospheric somehow. That's a really good point. I totally agree with you.
Mhm.
I haven't read that one yet. I don't know
I
how I
would
would get along.
definitely encourage you guys to at least try The Raven and the Reindeer by her,
Okay.
Okay.
because I think that one is better.
Yeah. That's good.
Cool. Well, I wanted to know if there's anything else you wanted to say, because we're at 1.5 hours. I know Joanna, you wanted to maybe go live your day and us go sleep soon.
Yeah.
So,
Probably late where you are. So.
is there anything else you want to say? Any books that you really love? Anything that makes you love a book even more? Here's a question that we got. Is there a book which has stayed with you over time, no matter what, like an old friend?
Oh, that's a good question.
Oh, that is a good question. I mean, The Final Empire for me, I guess, because it just feels so comforting. but I've also reread it a million times, so I don't know if that counts. If it's a book that I've only read once and has stayed with me, I don't know.
I think that for me, because I've only started reading on a daily basis for the last 2 years. That's difficult to say. And then the older books that I've read that have stayed with me for quite a while is A Thousand Splendid Suns by Khaled Hosseini, if I pronounce his
yeah.
name correctly. Just because I think about it sometimes, and I'm just afraid to reread it because that was such an emotional read that I'm afraid. But I still think about that, and it's been years since I've read it. So that has definitely had an impact on me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I feel like this is probably too soon in a way, but I always want to go back to Malazan because even though I finished that at the very, like I finished it a year ago, but I don't think I've ever read a series like that has put me on such an emotional wave for months and months and months and months later. I'm still emotional thinking about that last book and what happened. I'm still emotional over it. So that might have to be my answer. And I haven't reread that. So
Was that your first time reading those books?
Mhm.
Oh wow, okay.
I've only read the series once. Yeah.
Wow. I feel like you're the the knowledge fountain for it. So I'm like, oh, you must have read it a million times, but
Oh
I didn't-
no. And I'm definitely not the knowledge fountain. The person who is probably a much better knowledge fountain than I am is Philip Chase because he reread the
Yeah.
series.
Okay.
And I always had to kind of defer to him sometimes when I had questions. But yeah, and he loves talking about it just as much too. And as far as plot, again, like there are several things in several plot points in that story that that still go over my head. I don't know that I fully understood it, but the just but that last book and like where everything goes and the trajectory of the whole series and the way it makes you look back at previous books, and I don't know, there's just such a gravitas and there's so much, I don't know, so much beauty to it. It's sublime.
One day I will read that. I've been getting the itch. I messaged you about that. I was like, I really want to read it, but there's so many other things I want to read, but I really want to read this.
Yeah. It's a commitment though. I would recommend knocking out some other series first, just to make sure you have the space for it. Because like for me, that was the one challenge about it, is that I did, because I had I kept on putting it off to read other series. I just made a commitment last year. I said, this is going to be my number one priority series. And as a result, and I'm a very slow reader, as a result, I just didn't read very many books last year. I really didn't. I think I read somewhere between 40 and 50 books, which isn't a lot for a booktuber. And the only book I read in the month of December last year was The Crippled God. That was the only book I read. And the month before, I think like books 8, 9, and 10, it took a whole month to read those 3 books. For me, it probably wouldn't for you all, but it would.
I'm a slow reader, so 8 and 10 are big books, so
they're huge.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And there's a lot to process, so I did take a lot of time to like write notes and things like that, so I could do videos. But that's a lot. It's a big commitment.
Yeah, this is a book I also really want to read.
Oh,
I think I would like
to. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. After Piranesi, I'm like, oh, I definitely need to read more from that author.
Agreed.
And I think those are the only 2 that she has published, right? And then maybe a short story collection as well.
There's one that Evie read, if she's still around. The Bare Nightingale. Yeah, that's a great read too.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a fantastic trilogy.
I need to finish the series.
There is one that Evie read, and I cannot remember the name of it. I want to say there was like a French name in it or something.
Yeah, I have the same. It's a white cover with pink on it, maybe, and flowers.
Yeah,
I don't know, but that one.
Yeah, and I know we didn't talk a lot about Sanderson, but I mean, I really enjoyed my time reading Sanderson, even though I keep joking I'm on a Sanderson diet right now because I had some burnout with that author. But I did have fun, like with Warbreaker. I think Warbreaker was this book that I had a lot. I listened to that on audio, and I thought it was fun.
Okay, there we go.
There it is. Yes, that's one. Adieu. Ladies of Adieu. Grace Adieu.
I didn't know that she had something else. I thought that those were only 2 books, Piranesi and Jonathan Strange. Cool.
Which
Yeah, send
are
it.
extremes.
Yeah, I know. Like this big and then like this tiny. Yeah, Brandon Sanderson is. I can understand now you could get too much of it as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There are just certain things about his writing. I think my reading taste shifted a lot while I was reading his books too, and that was kind of a challenge. And then certain things that he did as a writer start to come to the forefront of my attention more, and it started to not work for me as well. I know Yoli knows what I mean.
Yes, I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah. But
It's a taste preference thing, I think, because I still really appreciate him as an author, and I think
yeah,
that what he does and his style he does well, but it's just not something that I gravitate towards at this point in time.
right.
Mm.
Exactly. Same here. Yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah.
I will read the fifth Stormlight book though, because I already read books 1 through 4. So I'm like, I will go ahead and read that. And so being on the slight Sanderson diet I'm on right now, I'm kind of glad it's taken a while, but yeah, I will read it.
Yeah, definitely. And next year we have all the secret books coming out too, so I'm excited about those.
Oh man.
I'm gonna have a lot. No, I'm trying to catch up with the. I was telling you, Lean, this. I haven't read anything. I just read Fool's Errand this month, and it's the 17th. So I don't know, but I'm trying to. Next book I'm reading is Elantris, and then I have only a few short stories left in the Cosmere, and then I'm done with the Cosmere. So then I'm ready for the next stuff he's gonna publish.
That's cool. That's
Yeah.
cool. Yay.
But his books, I don't think I could also like just go back to back to back, between his series and stuff. I do just because, like I was telling you earlier, I'm more in like my feelings with other authors, so sometimes I need to put those in between as well. So
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
So you are reading Elantris now, Johanna? What are you reading, other Johanna?
Huh? Which one of us?
you, what are you reading?
What am I
Yeah.
reading right now? Right now, I'm reading The Thousandfold Thoughts. I'm reading the 3rd book in the Baker series. And at the same time as I'm reading that, I'm very, very slowly making my way through Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy, which is not a fantasy. And I think that's been an interesting thing for me this last year is I've been reading so many, I want to say I've read more non-fantasy books this year than I've read in a long time. And it's really going to make my end of the year videos confusing because I have like some of my favorite books, honestly, were not fantasy this year. A lot were historical fiction or just outside of the genre completely. And I don't really know how I'm going to do like top 10. If I need to do a separate one for fantasy and a separate one. And then some are like genre bendy. I'm like, is that fantasy though? It's going to be so confusing.
Yeah.
But yeah,
It's gonna be
hoping to
fun.
finish off the Prince of Nothing trilogy this month. That's my goal.
Okay, that's a big one.
Yeah.
Are the books big in that trilogy? I don't remember.
And Elric Volume 1. Yes.
There we go. Yeah.
I did mention that in my video yesterday too. Yes.
I need to watch your videos.
I'm going to try my best. I need to start speed reading. I need to read quickly. I'm probably going to do that for the rest of the day. Just read.
Oh, lovely. I'm going to do that tomorrow. I think I'm just going to take the day to read again. I did that last Sunday, so.
Sounds wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Johanna, for having me on, and nice talking to you too.
Yeah, thank you for coming. Thank you for taking time out of your days. And thank you to everyone who was also in the chat and for everyone who's watching it back. If you want to subscribe to these lovely ladies, their channels are linked down below, of course. And until next time, happy reading. Bye.
Happy reading.
Bye.